Hello and welcome to the Vaults of Terra. My name is Ed and today we're going to be returning to the Chaos Marines with a quick look at the common weaponry used by the forces of Chaos Space Marines, mostly maintained and constructed by the Dark Mechanicum in the service of the Chaos Gods. Now, a quick disclaimer before I get started: many of these weapons lack artwork, which I am legally allowed to use in my videos, so I apologise that many of these images will have non-relevance to what is actually being talked about. I'm sorry about that, I will do what I can, but anyway, let's get started. First, let's talk about the close combat weapons, starting with the Bedlam Staff, which is a demonic weapon. Created during the Horus Heresy by the Thousand Sons Legion, these staves are now held by various warriors of chaos, and are steeped in the psychic remains of many others from their long usage. These staves remove all thoughts from a target's mind temporarily, making them pause for a moment whilst their minds reset and they begin thinking again, allowing the Chaos Warriors to attack whilst their enemy is undefended. Next up is the Axe of Khorne, a demonic weapon imbued with the bloodlust of Khorne. It drives the bearer to feats of murder and desolation, mainly used by the Bloodthirsters, but also a gift to powerful champions of Khorne. Next up is a Berserker Axe, a chain weapon. Distinct from the Axes of Khorne, these chain weapons are possessed by demons of pure rage, and are mainly found among Khorne Berserkers. A Berserker Glaive, a demonic weapon, is another of Khorne's angry weapons. This glaive is possessed by the spirit of a Bloodletter, driven insane by captivity and forcing the bearer to remain in a constant state of mental combat to avoid the weapon taking control of them. They are also granted rage and a resilience to damage in the form of a blood frenzy, though the desire to take any life, even those of one's allies, is very strong. Now comes the Blood Maul, a power weapon, not Khorne affiliated surprisingly. These mauls are power weapons used by Chaos Lords to knock opponents off their feet and crush what is left of them. A Cataclysmic Hellblade, a demonic weapon, is another Khornate weapon used by the sorcerers as a gift from the Lord of Change, though how Tzeentch ended up with a Khornate weapon is a mystery. When wielded, it can inflict incredible damage, but the price is the bearer's own mind. A chain axe is another popular weapon, once popular amongst certain legions during the Great Crusade. Few outside the Khorne Berserkers or Chaos Forces now wield this axe-shaped chain weapon. Its long handle allows for greater force behind a hit than a chainsword allows, though at the cost of a smaller cutting edge. A Chain Fist is a Power Fist variant. Its bayonet uses the Power Fist energy field to augment its cutting and can cut through even the heaviest armour like a knife through butter, though it is slow to use. Next up is the Chainsword, a widespread weapon through both the Loyal and Traitor Legions. The Chainsword uses a monomolecular razor chain running through a motored handle and along a sword-like blade to messily cut through the flesh and armour of tough opponents. The roar of its motor has signalled many a death over the millennia, and it's postulated it was first created to deal with the heavily resistant orcs, but later found more common usage cutting through the power armour of their former brothers during the Great Crusade. It is used by most close combat focused troops among the Chaos Forces, along with squad leaders and higher ranked individuals. A chain glaive is another weapon favoured by Khorne's warriors and the Night Lords. Its construction is simply a modified chainsword attached to a spear-like handle, giving the wielder greater range and swinging power at the cost of some dexterity with the weapon. A Chaos Chainsword is distinct from a standard chainsword, being a demonic weapon. It is blessed by dark powers, providing the wielder with greater power when using the chainsword. There is also a possessed chainsword variant that has demons of bloodshed and terror bound to its core to increase its damage, although sounding much like a Khornate weapon, it is not specifically one. Now, the Chaos Power Sword is a sword dedicated to Chaos Undivided, inlaid with the four symbols of Slaanesh, Tzeentch, Khorne and Nurgle to grant greater power to its user. The Dark Blade is another demonic weapon. It is a sword with a jet black, unblemished blade, although the hilt, grip and pommel will sometimes carry decoration dedicated to the Chaos Gods. The blade itself feeds on souls of its opponents and uses this to make its bearer commit even more and more acts of savage violence in order to feed itself. The Demonic Maul, a demon weapon, is bound with a demon of destruction inside, with every blow of this weapon producing awesome destructive power. Next is the Dread Axe, another demonic weapon, which is vampiric in nature and thirsts for the souls of other demons, ironically, allowing the bearer to move with great speed to dispatch its foes and drink their souls. The Ether Lance is a close combat weapon but can be used at range. Technically, it is a miniaturized gate for the warp power to surge through it into the material plane, and can be used at range as well as in close combat by using bolts of warp energy to cover a large area or lure an enemy into the lance itself, piercing its enemies and consuming them with warp energy. Next up are the Lightning Claws, a powered weapon used by both Imperium and Chaos Forces. These modified power fists channel its energy along several claws attached to the fist, able to rip and tear through an enemy, ignoring their armour to cut through flesh and metal indiscriminately, unless opposed by another power weapon or something imbued with warp magic. A variant is the Paralysing Lightning Claw, which incorporates an injector filled with neurotoxins to poison the enemy as they are ripped apart, in an example of weapon redundancy gone mad, but we are dealing with chaos here. The Man Reaper is another demonic weapon, infused with Nurgle's power, usually used by the Death Guard and dedicated to Nurgle's rot. These scythes have a rusted appearance and are dripping with filth seeping directly from the throne of Nurgle itself through the Immaterium onto these blades, which disgust their enemies as they are used against them. An Oracle Stave is another force weapon and is used mainly by Chaos Sorcerers. It is usually used to weave the path of its enemies together until their fates collide in an explosion of magic energy that usually kills or seriously injures those whose fates have been meddled with. A Pandemic Staff is another demonic weapon which can also act at range. It bears Nurgle's power, and these staffs are vessels for diseases that are carried from the warp into the Materium and are unleashed on an unsuspecting battlefield to be ravaged by sickness and disease. A Plague Fist is a power weapon which is related to a Power Fist, and it is dedicated to Nurgle. Infused with various contagions and used by the Plague Lord's champions, it can cause confusion and sickness in the champion's enemies as they are devastated by the Fist's destructive powers. The Plague Sword is also a close combat weapon, also dedicated to Nurgle, whose touch infects the wounded with Nurgle's rot, a virulent disease that usually kills the opponent even if they receive only a minor scratch from the weapon. A variant of this is a Plague Knife, a smaller version of the same diseased blade. Next up is a Power Fist, as I've mentioned, a power weapon, an oversized gauntlet with widespread use in both the Imperium and Chaos forces, a blow from which discharges energies into the opponent, magnifying the damage done and negating the enemy's armor, causing massive damage, even to heavily armored foes. Usually the wielder will be a commander of a force or a Terminator, though other units do use some Power Fists on occasion. The Power Scorch is also a power weapon, although it's quite unusual. It's usually attached to larger units and constructs, and the weapon's independent tentacle-like limbs are filled with nigh uncontrollable energy, which rip through their opponents as they lash about wildly, although any friendly unit getting close to this weapon can be ripped asunder as well. The Skullbreaker is another power weapon, a power maul decorated and dedicated to Khorne, which can rend reality and stun its opponents as the wielder moves in for the kill. There are also the Staffs of Demonic Flame, Tzeentch, and Warp Fire, all of which are given to Chaos Sorcerers to enhance their warp powers and throw the raw power of the Immaterium at their enemies. The Swords of Fate and the Swords of Flame and Swords of Spite are also all force weapons imbued with the powers of Chaos that can be directed to specific tasks by their Chaos Sorcerer wielders to damage the enemy or sometimes protect their allies. The Sword of Undeath is a power weapon used by Plague Champions to inflict the Curse of Undeath on their enemies, forcing them to fight for the champion's forces until their bodies succumb to damage and are destroyed. Finally, for close combat weapons are the Warp Blades, weapons blessed by Tzeentch which can dissipate warp energies directed at its wielder, whilst still bringing a powerful close combat weapon to bear. Next up, I'll move on to the mainly man-portable ranged weapons. Now, first is a Blastmaster, which is not an AT stereo but a sonic weapon, a weapon used mainly by Noise Marines dedicated to Slaanesh. It produces an intense beat that can rupture both the eyes and organs of an enemy. Modifying the beat can change the damage from one individual to a wide area, although it lowers the damage potential the weapon causes. Next up is a Bolter or Bolt Gun. Now, this is ubiquitous for every Space Marine, Chaos or Imperial. It fires rocket-assisted bolts at a rapid rate that explode on impact or penetration with an enemy, making them more like mini RPGs than slug throwers. Useful for penetrating infantry armor or shredding unarmored infantry, they have numerous types and patterns which are too widespread to mention here. They also have variant bolt pistols which trade range and rate of fire to allow them to be wielded in one hand, and heavy bolters, large weapons that can be mounted to vehicles or carried by Chaos Marines that unleash a wave of bolter fire to decimate enemy units or even light vehicles with the sheer weight of its firepower. Its variants for Chaos forces are the Possessed Bolter, whose demon-branded ammunition causes much greater damage on impact, and the Demon Eye Bolter that warps the ammunition's passage through the air and increases the weapon's accuracy. There is also the Chaos Bolt Pistol, which is a demonically infused bolt pistol that contains the hatred of 10,000 years used against a despised Imperium. It hungers for death, and its rate of fire is legendary. In addition to the standard bolters are the Combi Flamer, the Combi Plasma Gun, and the Combi Melter Gun, which are all bolt weapons which have underslung weapons of their respective type, Flamer, Plasma Gun, or Melter Gun, respectively. They have a limited range and rate of fire, but can be a powerful addition to a Chaos Marine's bolter and helps increase their versatility, usually provided to high-ranking or powerful members of the Chaos forces. There is also Demonic Fire, a demon weapon integrated into the gauntlets of a Chaos Lord. These weapons give the Lord a ranged flamer attack against those who come close to him. The Doom Siren is another long-range weapon, a sonic weapon as well, used by Slaanesh warriors, and amplifies a Noise Marine's cries into powerful shockwaves that can be used to decimate their opponents. Next up is a Flamer. Now this is a weapon of ancient design. It ignites flammable fuel over a moderate range, used on lightly armoured or unarmoured infantry. There are heavier variants mounted to vehicles to prevent anti-armour infantry from getting close or laying traps ahead of a vehicle. Next up is the Kai Gun, a demonic weapon that is used by high-ranking Chaos Marines in Terminator armour or Demon Princes. From the world of Kai and the Eye of Terror, these massive weapons would require 2 normal humans to lift, but can easily be wielded by a power-armoured human or demon. While they look like bolters, its true ammunition is malice and hatred from the slaughtered population of the world of Kai. Next up is the Melter Gun, another ubiquitous weapon from Imperium and Chaos forces alike. It uses subatomic gas agitation to create blasts of superheated gases that can vaporize clean through almost all armor, although its massive power consumption means it has a shorter effective range than most weapons. It has a larger version known as a multi-melter, which is a longer range and much more devastating degree of firepower, though must usually be mounted to either Devastator Chaos Marines or vehicles. Melter pistols do exist and have much shorter range and are rarely considered effective unless used in close combat, and are usually called Inferno pistols if not Melter pistols. Plasma guns are another weapon shared by Chaos and the Imperium. A plasma gun fires balls of superheated hydrogen-based plasma passing through a magnetic accelerator. The bolt of plasma detonates on impact and can cause horrendous damage to flesh or armour, though the charging method used by the gun can cause the weapon to overheat, either requiring a cooldown period or causing a meltdown, destroying the weapon and usually the user. There are plasma pistols with smaller range and damage, and plasma cannons with higher range and damage, although both suffer from the overheating problem. The Sonic Blaster is another sonic weapon used by the Slaanesh Noise Marines. It can literally rip apart enemies with its sound, either in beams or pulses of devastating noise. And finally, for basic range weapons, is the Sporecaster, a Slaanesh weapon that uses exotic toxins that can incapacitate enemies and give them insanity-inducing hallucinations. Finally, for the weapons section, I will be dealing with the heavy weapons. First up is the autocannon, a solid shot weapon used by both the Imperium and Chaos. This weapon follows the ancient principles of solid projectiles and gunpowder to fire projectiles into the enemy, in some cases exploding, but in most cases using the momentum of the solid round to rip through the enemy. Used by Chaos Devastator Marines or on vehicles, it is a precise anti-infantry weapon that can deal good damage against both infantry and lightly armoured vehicles, along with larger biological organisms. Its simple design makes it easy to mass produce and repair compared to other available weaponry, hence its availability even though its weapon's damage is actually quite low comparative to the other weapons wielded by the Chaos Legions. Baleflame is another flame weapon used by the massive demon engines, using demonic fire to burn the enemies to ash on the battlefield. There is the Battle Cannon, an ordnance weapon, a large vehicle-mounted version of the autocannon usually used against medium and heavily armoured targets, and is most seen on tanks of the Imperial Guard, but also tanks used by the Chaos Legions. The Demolisher Cannon is a vehicle-mounted ordnance weapon, much like the Battle Cannon. The Demolisher Cannon has a shorter range, but has much higher penetration shells that are typically used in sieges or bunker busting, though it is just as effective on enemy vehicles. Ectoplasm Cannons are vehicle-mounted plasma cannons that use raw chaos energy to power its plasma reaction, but the fire from it usually resembles tortured souls that envelop and destroy the targets, although the potential dangerous blowback from the weapon is not to be disregarded and is similar to an overheating plasma weapon. The Hades autocannon is similar to a standard autocannon, but it has 6 barrels that rotate with the scream of the souls damned to the warp, and can be used effectively against both light and heavily armoured targets. It is usually used on medium vehicles and aerial vehicles. Havoc missile launchers are a precursor to Cyclone missile launchers used by Imperial Terminators, though these are not usually man-portable. These missile launchers can be used to decimate enemy infantry or punch through heavy armour, and are usually used in a hunter-killer fashion, having very limited ammunition. The las cannon is a las weapon, quite rare amongst the Chaos Legions, but also used by both Imperium and Chaos forces. It is a high-powered laser weapon, perfect for punching through heavy armour and destroying vehicles, though it's less effective against massed infantry, only being able to aim and target at one individual at a time, and not having the wide burst damage that can be done by other weapons. The missile launcher is a missile weapon, unsurprisingly, and has been used since ancient battles on Terra. The missile launcher can be loaded with a variety of different ammunition to either do heavy damage to armoured targets or decimate infantry. They are used by both the Chaos Legions and the Imperium, and are usually man-portable, with very versatile ammunition depending on what is being loaded into it. The Reaper autocannon is another autocannon variant, portable enough to be used by Chaos Marine Terminators. It is compact and rapidly firing, but still requires Terminator armor to move and operate efficiently. Finally, the Chaos Forces use grenades of several kinds, including crack anti-armor grenades, frag anti-infantry grenades, melter anti-vehicle grenades, and blight grenades, filled with diseases of Nurgle and used by Plague Marines to infect their enemies, penetrating armor and destroying the flesh of their enemies within. That's all I have to say on the weapons of the Chaos Marines today. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have any comments, suggestions, or things I may have missed, please leave them in the comments section below, or you can send me a private message. Next up, we will be moving on to the Eldar, specifically having a look at the Eldar weaponry and how their unique Xenos biology has affected the equipment that they use. Otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed the video today. See you next time on the Vaults of Terra.